Good day, everyone. Welcome to our economics class. You're also welcome to the Scholar Online class. Okay, I am your tutor for economics. My name is Tutor Abdulhafiz Balogun. So today, I'll be discussing a very interesting topic in economics, and that is the theory of demand. Okay, so from our everyday experiences, demand occurs. And in fact, for all topics in economics, for all the subjects, the topics being discussed in economics, all of them are everyday experiences. And demand is absolutely one of them. So when we are talking about demand, demand is an activity we engage in every day of our life, like every other thing. So, but basically, in our basic concept in economics, there are concepts known as choice, concept known as needs and wants, particularly. So all of those ones are still very basic. So when we now move on to demand, that is when we are moving some step forward. When a consumer moves to the level of demand, that is when the willingness to get that particular want or need, now it now manifests in a particular consumer. So when a consumer is having the intention of getting a particular product, like a very little intention of getting it, that is what demand is known about. So basically, what demand is that demand is the willingness on the part of a consumer to get a product or a commodity for himself or herself at a particular point in time. So every day, everybody is having his or her wish, desire, okay, to get items for himself or herself, and that's exactly what demand is all about. So, but then there is now a concept known as effective demand. And demand in itself does not bring the product or the commodity to the table of the consumer. It does not bring the product to the table of the consumer. But then it is when it now moves to effective demand. Okay, that is a demand that is backed up by cash. That is the demand, the consumer is now having the money, in fact, the ability, the financial capability to get such a commodity for himself or herself. So that is what is known as effective demand. And moving on, we'll be discussing what law of demand is. It's a basic law of demand, and it goes for the price and the quantity the consumer wants to get for himself or herself. Okay, and the law simply states that the higher the price, the lower the quantity to be demanded, and vice versa. That is, when you're having a lower price, the consumer will be going for higher quantity of commodity. That is, once the price is going up, the quantity to be demanded for goes down. And that is why it is called an inverse relationship. That is, if one is going south, the other goes north. So they are not, having a direct relationship. All right, that is the basic law of demand. And that law is actually an assumption. And it is very true to a very large extent. And that is why every other thing is held constant. Every other thing is, all things being equal. That is, the taste of the consumer, does not change. The population does not change. What we are considering in the law is just the price. That is, the price goes up, the commodity to be demanded, goes down, just like that. So every other factors that we later, discover, like the taste of the consumer, the population of the people, change in technology, substitute goods, the effect of substitute goods, all of those things are held constant. They do not change, and that is why when you have higher price, you have lower quantity demanded. So we quickly move on to the types of demand, and these are the four major types of demand we have. And the very first is derived demand. When we are talking about a derived demand is when there is a demand for a particular product as a result of the demand for another. Okay, that is when people demand for a product, the result is that you're having a product that has been demanded for earlier on. Let's take for example, people demand for good roads. As citizens, we demand for good roads in our country. So the demand for good roads necessitates the demand for labor. That is, the people to construct such a road. So another example is the demand for bread. Everybody is in demand for bread. So once there is high demand for bread, who wants the bread? The demand for bread necessitates the demand for flour and sugar, for example. That is, we have bread as a finished good. But then before we can come up, with bread, we actually need sugar and flour, as the case may be. So in that case, you are going to be in the need of bread. Sorry, in the need of sugar and flour before you can get bread. So the demand for one necessitates the demand for other. So the very next type of demand is composite demand. In this kind of demand, such commodity are demanded for simultaneously. That is, if you demand for one and you do not demand for the other, the previous one you have demanded for is not useful. That is, the usefulness of one depends on the availability of the other. So let's take for example, and bear it in mind that all of these things are only true to some extent. They are not true, in absolute. They are not absolute terms. One can argue then, and that is why, they are called laws that are subjected to criticism. And then, yes, we have the criticisms of all of these concepts. So when we are talking about composite demand, so once you demand for one, it necessitates the demand for other. Let's say, for example, car and petrol, and other goods that we know that comes together to a very large extent. When you have a car without petrol or fuel, so that means the car does not work. Somebody can argue now we have electronic cars. Yes, that's an exception to the law. So, but then basically we have some products that are demanded for together, and those ones are known as what? Composite demand. They work hand in hand. The absence of one, makes the other not useful. So the very next is complementary demand, and that is absolutely close to what composite demand is. In this case, too, it's very close. I think this one are like people in partnership. They also work hand in hand. Once you go for one, the other also follows. So the very next is competitive demand. So in this case, we have some products called substitute products. You later find out that in factors that affect demand. So substitute products are products that serve the same purpose. That is, if you do not see one, you can use the other. That's exactly what we're talking about here. So, like for example, detergents. You have several brands of detergents. So once you do not see one, you can go for the other. And definitely the price of one, if there is fluctuation in the price of one, it affects the demand for the other. So in this case, this kind of demand are goods that can be substituted for. If you do not see one, you can go for the other. So those are the basic types of demand that we have. So we quickly move on to what is known as demand schedule, and that is our very next subtopic for this class. Demand schedule is actually a table. It's a table showing the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, and in this case, we have what is okay. Let's quickly demonstrate a demand schedule. Okay, that is, it's a table showing the relationship between price in naira. You have to add that, or any form of currency you are using, and the quantity to be demanded. Okay, so let's quickly take for example, we have a particular product having the price ranging from 5 naira, 10, 15, 20, 25, and then the quantity from 50, 40, 30, 20, and 10. So this is an example of a demand schedule, a table showing the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, so when you look at this table closely, it is also trying to explain the law of demand we have stated. That is, the higher the price, the lower the quantity to be demanded. Okay, if you observe very well, this can be any commodity. Here, when the commodity was 5 naira, that is, the price changes here over time. When the price was 5 naira, that is 5 naira, the consumer was able to get 50. But you observe that once it starts to increase from 5, 10, 15, and so on, definitely the purchasing power of the consumer reduces, especially when the income is held constant. Remember, every other thing held constant, all things being equal. All right. So that is, the income does not change, population does not decrease, the taste does not change. It is only the price you are considering. So if the price keeps increasing, what happens is that the quantity to be demanded by such a consumer reduces. All right. This is actually, increasing. All right. But then this is going to the other way. Okay. So in this case, they are moving in different direction. That is why you have stated that it's an inverse relationship. So that's exactly what we are trying to talk about here. Price is the only thing you are considering. So from this schedule you are having, from this table, all right, we can actually come up with our demand curve. Okay. So our demand curve is actually a graph showing this relationship, the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So what we are trying to do is that you're only representing what you have here on the demand schedule on a demand curve. Okay. So here, the vertical aspect of the graph, we have our price in naira. All right, and it ranges from 5 to 10, 15, 20, and 25. So the quantity demanded over time by the same consumer ranges from 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 50 commodity that was demanded for. So while it was 10 naira, while it was 5 naira, that's the very first one, the consumer was able to demand for 50. The price was still very much low in this instance, and such a consumer was able to go for more. So but then the price increased from 5 to 10 to 15, and the quantity he was able to demand it for keeps reducing. While it was 15, the person was only able to go for 30, while it was 20, and finally when the price increased to 25 naira, the person was only able to get 10 of that commodity. Here too, the graph you are seeing, the demand curve you are seeing, also expresses the law of demand. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded for. Okay, and that's our demand curve. So once you're able to plot this, it's also showcasing a law of demand. Likewise, it's also showcasing a law of demand. So let's quickly move on to the factors that affect demand. As I've said earlier on, that the law of demand in itself only focused on price. Every other thing, like the price of other commodities, income of the consumer, changes in the taste of consumer, and every other thing is held constant. All these ones are not at play; they are not working. So it's only the price that is working in this instance. All right. So basically, the factor here that affects demand goes for our law of demand, and that's very simple. That is, the higher the price, when the price goes up, we have a lower quantity to be demanded. So one of those things that affect demand, for example, a consumer, all right, that's having the same income over time. When the price of a particular commodity gets for himself every month, probably the salary earner, once it increases, the person will be able to get a lower quantity. But then you still have the same income or the same earnings for the month. When the price goes down, yes, you might have scenarios whereby the price of commodities goes down. In that case, the consumer will be able to go for more, because definitely you are now having more money to go for more goods. All right, and that explains the factor price as a factor affecting demand. So the very next factor that affects demand is the price of other commodities. As you find out here, competitive demand, it was stated that we have some commodities that are substitute products. That is, if you do not see one, you can use the other. And we have, several products like that. Your cars, you do not see one brand, you can go for the other. Whatever one use, most times they're having, substitute products. And so in this case, when you are having a product, okay, our detergent, for example, product A and B. So in this case, probably initially, both are sold for 15 naira per unit. But then you now have a scenario whereby, remember, these two products serve the same purpose. That's competitive, that they serve the same purpose. All right. So, but then there is a change in the price of one of them, any of them. All right. Even if this changes to 51 naira. All right. Definitely, we'll be having some consumer that will be moving away from this A product, commodity A, and then they will go for B, even if the fact is that they are using A before. Before you know it, they keep on moving to B. Somebody might argue that we have some consumer, regardless of the price, they will still, stick to that particular product. Yes, that's very much correct. And that is why you have said all of these things are not absolute. All right. So they're having the exceptions. But in most cases, that is the way consumers are, the average consumer. That's where they are. So once they see that a commodity increases in price, they go for another product that serves the same purpose. All right. And in that case, the demand for this, becomes lower because more consumers are moving away from product A to B. And before you know it, product B will be having more consumers purchasing, their product. All right. So that is price of other commodities. It also affects the demand for products. So the very next is the income of the consumer. Definitely, income of the consumer also affects the demand for products, especially when income fluctuates. A consumer that is demanding or buying two previously, and then the income or the earnings increase for the month. Absolutely, such consumer will eventually go for more commodity because he or she is having more income. But then, when we have a lower salary or a lower earnings for the month, there's going to be a lower commodity to be demanded for. So, also changes in the taste of consumers. So this is actually a subjective factor, regardless of the price. Sometimes some consumers still stick to a particular product. Probably they derive so much satisfaction from it. Yes. So regardless of the price, they still go for the product. Okay. But then we still have some consumers. They are, even if it's a substitute goods. All right. If there is a shift in the taste of such a consumer, before you know it, they move to another product because they want to try something new. That might be as a result of advertisement, or eventually the price of that particular commodity, because sometimes tastes change because of price. All right, so it is important that we fully understand this particular factor. As I said earlier on, it is mostly subjective. It depends on the individual. It's a choice. So in this case, when there is now change in taste, it also affects demand. So when there is change from A to B now, before you know it, B is having increased demand, and this is going to be having, that is A will be having increased demand. So the very next factor is tax, and that goes for income. There's always tax on income or salary for those that earn monthly. All right, and in fact, there is always tax, what is known as value-added tax, for those individuals that buy goods and services. All of these things affect demand. When there is increase in tax, for example, definitely the earnings has decreased in that case. All right, an individual that earns 20,000 naira a month, okay, and then there's a deductible tax of, take for example, 2,000 naira. So the disposable income, that is income after tax, will be 18,000. Let's say this is the initial tax, and then you have this final balance, that is the final salary. Okay, if this tax increases from 2,000 naira to say 4,000 naira, That means you are going to be having a lower disposable income here, income after tax, 16,000. And the consumer will not be able to get whatever he or she has been getting before. It's going to decrease because you're having a decreased salary or earnings. Or another scenario where you have a lower tax or a decreased tax. So in this case, you are going to be having, take for example, this now decreases to about 1,500. So this disposable income here increases, and definitely the consumer will be demanding for more. All right. So it is important that we are able to apply these things. It's a two-way thing. That is, when one is going up, that is tax, what happens to our demand? And the other way around too, that is, once it increases, those two ways, increase and decrease. So what happens to demand? It's important we are able to apply that. So the very last one is the population. The population of the people. Once the population increases, that means you are going to be having more pressure on the availability of the goods that are available. There is going to be more pressure on it. That is, you have several other individuals demanding for that product, we also demand for. Okay, so when there is increase in population, what happens to demand is that it becomes, there is higher demand, and in turn you have higher price. Okay, so when there is increase in population in a particular area, that means there's going to be more demand for a particular product. So also when there is decrease in population, is a direct one here. So you also have decrease um, in demand. So it is important you are able to apply all these factors, and basically the law of demand, you should not forget, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and vice versa. So for this class, we'll be stopping here, and in our very next class, we'll be discussing changes in demand and changes in quantity demand. Thank you for listening.